Well, hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Today's episode, we have a special guest. We have Josh Maichele from L Acoustics. He is the House of Worship Specialist from L Acoustics. And today we're going to be talking about speaker technology, specifically from L Acoustics. But before we jump into that, how's everybody doing today?
It's Monday.
Good.
It's a Monday. Yeah. The sun is out though here in West Michigan, so that is good. That is always a good sign, right? And but
starting to look like spring.
Yeah,
it looks like it. It just doesn't quite feel like it yet.
Well, did you guys cut your lawn this past weekend or no? Holding off on that still?
No,
I just not yet.
Not yet.
No.
Okay, I might be doing it this week or this upcoming weekend, but I have neighbors who they've been out there, man, working, and
I got to dethatch it.
Yeah.
Dethatch it.
Yeah. Got a bunch of dead grass.
Yeah, man. I actually want to rip all my grass out and redo the whole thing, my whole yard. But
I wish I could do that too.
Yeah, it'd be pretty expensive though.
And gotta say lawn, not grass. We're in Michigan, remember?
Yeah. But Josh, thanks for joining us, man. So Josh, Josh, why don't we, for our listeners who may not be familiar with you, why don't you give us a brief history of your background and how you kind of ended up at L Acoustics?
Yeah, I'll give you the Cliff Notes version because that is a fairly long story. But my involvement at L Acoustics started probably 10 years ago now. Originally, I was part of a company, started a company that was a certified provider for L Acoustics, and started doing a lot of house worship projects with them. And from there, I became a consultant for L Acoustics. And then I've been on staff, I think, about 4 years now. So it's been really good run. But, you know, what really led me to here today and my position with L Acoustics, which, as you mentioned, is house of worship specialist, goes all the way back to me being 9 years old behind a mixing console. And being mentored by Rich Mullins, front of house engineer at a young age. And so that really led the path to where I'm at today. So in between there are a handful of mega churches and parachurch organizations and small churches and everything in between, as well as some touring and things like that. So a lot came in to where I'm at today, but really, really happy and proud to be part of the L Acoustics team now. For the past multiple years, and looking forward to the future as well with them.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for that history.
Wait a minute. I need more than that.
You need what?
9 years old, and Rich Mullins lets you next to his counsel.
No, so I was 9 years old playing around with the knobs at church when Rich Mullins, sound engineer, walked up and said, "Hey, you like this kind of stuff?" And at 9 years old, my entire goal in life was to just make things loud.
Yeah.
So I was like, "Yeah, I'm into this," and that started what inevitably ended up with me,
Gotcha.
In my mid-20s behind consoles on tours and all that kind of stuff. So
very cool.
But it was pretty unique that for a short, brief time, he was the worship leader at the church I grew up in, and my family was very close with him and his crew and everything, and so. Up until his passing, we saw him quite a bit, actually, even when he was touring.
That's cool, man. That's
awesome.
really cool. For those that don't know, this is really, really awesome to have Josh with us today because I'm a pretty big fanboy of Josh, of his mixes. If you've never been to a live event that Josh is mixing at, you are missing out on an incredible talent. And I'm always kind of on the lookout to see when Josh is going to be mixing somewhere because, man, some of my favorite live mixes that I've ever heard, dude, you have done. And you're such a great talent. So thanks for being with us here today.
Thanks for having me. And thanks for those kind words.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Well, all right. Well, let's get into it. L Acoustics, right? Can you give us a little background on L Acoustics and the company?
Yeah, so L Acoustics is very unique company in that a huge amount of the loudspeaker technology that you're currently working with, regardless of the manufacturer, really was curated and started with L Acoustics. Dr. Christian Heil, who is still actively involved in the company, is actually who started L Acoustics back in the mid 80s. And so it started in a farm in the Marcoussis, France area. And still to this day, we maintain our corporate worldwide offices in Marcoussis, France, which is just outside of Paris. And then Christian now kind of, I guess, shares his time a bit between Marcoussis, but also he lives in London now, and that's where the head of Elisa is as well. So our corporate offices for Elisa. And so when Christian started the company, it really started out with coaxial speakers. And we can get into that here in a moment. But Christian is known to be the curator of the modern day line source. So prior to the modern day line source, and a lot of us kind of joke internally that this was that moment that Christian hit his head on a toilet, slipped and fell and hit his head on a toilet when, I know I can do this better, right? But if you really dig down into it a bit deeper, he was loading in a gig with a professor of his, and they were, I can only assume hanging some, big arrayable loudspeakers because the goal at that point was if you could make it louder up front, it was going to be louder in the back too, coincidentally. So, it was let's hang as many speakers as possible and just hope for the best. Raw horsepower was the name of the game. And Christian looked at that and said, I know I can do this better. And that started what became a lifelong passion for him. And I think it was last year, the year before, or just this past year, Christian was inducted into the Audio Hall of Fame
Cool.
for his contribution to the industry. And L Acoustics has been known for a long time, of being the company that is contributing technology and things surrounding that. So software and technology and methods that have really revolutionized the audio industry.
I would agree with that. What they did was completely turn things, the thinking completely upside down.
Well, why don't you, Todd, from your perspective, coming from, what the standard was before that, and then what happened, what your perspective on that was like during that brief history of the turning point, I guess.
I was just thinking, I hadn't actually thought about this in quite a while, but so yeah, you guys know, I kind of grew up in the industry. Hanging loudspeakers is where I cut my teeth. I didn't cut it behind a console like the rest of you guys, but did a lot of speaker installs and not from an engineering perspective, but just kind of hands-on. I learned myself what speakers do when they're together, what they do apart. I listened to a lot of real interesting people. I was not far from Buchanan, Michigan, so I spent a little time with the Electro Voice and L-Tech folks, and they were kind of revolutionary at the time. But I do remember the first time I heard an L Acoustics rig, and I honestly don't remember when exactly the date of it was, but I know I was at an NSCA, which is now Infocom, or they've combined, but back then it was National Systems Contractors Association, I believe it was, and I think it was in Nashville. And there was it was not. It was in Vegas, because it was the first time I ever heard Blue Man Group.
Okay.
I don't know how long they had been out, so it had to be, maybe it wasn't Infocom. Maybe I should just quit this story and start all over. Anyway, no. I do remember that the Blue Man Group was doing a contractor open event, and there was this speaker company I'd never heard of, and they had these line array things that I had never heard of, and I walked into the room and listened to, I never heard Blue Man Group, so that was pretty impressive, and absolutely could not believe my ears. I'm like, I don't know what that thing is with that skinny thing with all them boxes in a row like that. That just, I don't know what the heck that is, but I have no idea. It was amazing to me what I was listening to. So I do remember the first day I heard it.
That's really cool, man. That's awesome.
And I believe that was probably a Kudo rig.
Yeah. So, that was probably late 90s, early 2000s, because VDOSC landed in the States.
VDOSC, I'm sorry.
Around 1998. And so from there, VDOSC and DVDOSC and Blue Man was a heavy champion for us with both VDOSC and DVDOSC, and still to this day with Kara and K2. There you see that in all of the different Blue Man installations around the world. and they're touring or have been touring for the past year with Eliza as well.
Oh, nice.
It did take me a long time to get on the bandwagon. I will say that I was not an early adopter. I still stuck to my roots of conventional loudspeakers and this whole line. Even as impressive as it was, I'm kind of a slow adopter, I guess. So it took me a while, but have since then, lately it's I don't know. I don't think we've said, but at Parkway, L Acoustics is one of the manufacturers, the biggest manufacturer we lead with. We just love their products and what they do and how well they work. So that's why we wanted to make sure we had Josh on here from L Acoustics. So
absolutely.
It's been a great road. I'm glad I finally got on the bandwagon.
Yeah, and the thing is one of the things that we talk about is that I don't know if we've ever heard bad things about any L Acoustic rig ever, where it was like, hey, we put in this L Acoustic rig and it was horrible. We had to get L Acoustics out here to like fix everything. Like, we've never encountered a situation like that where it was like, man, this was not worth it to us. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about how you guys have approached your speaker technology to have such great results?
Sure. So I think one of the things that you have to really dial in on when you talk about the fact, and that quote is really telling when I'm going to say what I'm about to say, for you to say that we've never had an installation of L Acoustics where people went, oh, this was a terrible decision. And a huge reason for that is the ecosystem driven company that we are. And so when you start to look at L Acoustics and you draw back and we stop to not maybe specifically talk about a type of loudspeaker, whether this be coaxial, whether it be, point source or medium throw or long throw line source. If you look at L Acoustics as a whole and the methodology, we take this ecosystem approach because what it creates is consistency in deployment. Right? So whether that's being deployed by Parkway or it's being deployed by another another integrator or the direct end user, the goal in what we are doing when we can control everything from the mixing console, the back end of the mixing console to the loudspeaker, means that we have a high level of consistency, even if we have a high level of difference in knowledge and ability from contractor to contractor or from end user to end user. And that's, one of the things that I think really sets L Acoustics apart is the amount of time and effort we put into making sure that that ecosystem is easily reproducible.
And that's interesting. If I can comment on that, that was one of the things, if I'm looking back while I wasn't adopting, because you can look at that two different ways. I come from a world that speaker companies made speakers and amplifier companies made amplifiers and electronics people made electronics, right? There was a few manufacturers like Electro Voice and Harman, Bosch, Harman, that had multiple companies under one umbrella. But, for someone to tell me, well, if you buy my speaker, you have to buy my amplifier, that's the way I looked at that. And I didn't understand the backside of it until I did a few of them that I really understood, because it was a way for someone to say, to me, it was at first, I just didn't care for it. It was like the company's telling me what I should sell and how I should sell it and how we should put it together. And that's really our job. But when you see the consistency and you see, the quality of what you end up with at the end, it makes a ton of sense. So you just look at it from the right angle.
I think that consistency gives me confidence in going into the customer and saying, yeah, it's going to sound great. I can show you several other projects. We can go visit other projects. This is exactly what it's going to sound like for you guys as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was, I can tell you that the driving force for L Acoustics, if we go back to when they made that jump, because originally at the inception of L Acoustics, we were making loudspeakers, and it was more of that traditional mentality, Todd, like you talked about, where we were using third-party amplification, third-party processing, et cetera. But there is a high demand from front of house engineers around the world that were going, hey, we love VDusk. It is the thing we want to run on. But as we were coming out with K1, what people were saying is, can you give us something to increase the consistency that we get when we go venue to venue so that we have the same thing? Because what they weren't liking was walking into a venue and the system tech going, hey, man, you're going to love our new presets. It's like, yeah, maybe. or maybe not, right? And even if I do love your preset, is it so drastically different than Bob's preset yesterday on a VDOS grig that I have to change my mix, right? And so that was a huge driving force behind that decision to start bringing amplification and signal processing internal and part of the ecosystem, was to create that side of the consistency. Because prior to this, we as engineers were going on the site and we were deciding where the crossovers are. We were deciding the EQ per box, and honestly, a lot of the methodology and workflow in an install was there's system design ahead of time, but a lot of times we were modeling in 2D space, and so a huge amount of the engineering and the time went into that on-site portion, right? And Todd, I mean, actually, probably all four of us on here remember the days where we required a venue to be quiet for an entire week so that we could calibrate the speakers and then calibrate the speakers for the room, right? And there was a huge amount of worth and time and in what we were doing, and that was one of the things that certain guys were like, "You're gonna have to pull that from my cold dead hands," because that was the worth that they brought to the table in that scenario.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Where now,
that's what made you the company that you are, is by how you could take all these components in the industry, put them all together, and make something that sounded good. That was part of the magic. And when you took that away, you're taking
or didn't sound good.
Magic. Yeah.
But I think what companies like you guys at Parkway have found, and I have as an engineer and everything, is that number one, having it be right out of the box right away has saved my end user money. At the end of the day, it's, as we've mentioned, obviously created more consistency, but it's actually given you guys as a company, in my opinion, something more to fall back on, because you all won't always be at Parkway. And so there will be a legacy beyond you at Parkway. And they don't have to go, well, we have no idea what Todd did in the system and how he set it up, and he's gone now, right? So now it allows companies to be able to feel really comfortable to walk away from a job and go, no matter what tools we have internally, we know that this system will stand on its own.
Now, I have a question for you, Josh. Is there, I mean, at the end of the day, what really matters is the art and what's coming through the speaker, so to speak, whether it's somebody talking, or giving a presentation, it's a performance, if it's Broadway, or if it's music, concert, worship, that sort of thing. How does L Acoustics kind of approach that whole side of it? Because we use the technology with a specific end in mind, right? So is there a lot of collaboration that goes into when you come out with a new speaker line? Talk to me a little bit about that process, about how you guys approach that.
So that's an interesting question, in that if you pull back out of L Acoustics specifically, if you start talking about different manufacturers and different offerings from different manufacturers, a lot of times you'll hear like people say, well, for theater, I really like this speaker, right? Mm-hmm. Or for whatever. And actually, you pull way back to look at Broadway and go, they probably have 14 different manufacturers in a Broadway house, using this speaker for this fill and this speaker for the mains and this sub and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But if you look at it more, there have been certain speakers and certain manufacturers that are known to do something specific, right? Whether that's house of worship, whether that's theater, whether that's a performing arts center, whether that's a tour. And for a long time, actually, L Acoustics was known as, people knew VDOS. They didn't always know the name L Acoustics, but we were the touring standard, and still to this day are the touring standard. But when we start talking about installations, a lot of people were like, oh, they're a great touring speaker, but I have an install that I'm looking at. And from L Acoustics standpoint, when we start to look at a new product, or when we start to launch a new product, I think one of the things that we pride ourselves on a great deal is providing a product that can span from one genre to another. And a huge example of that is, for instance, we have Andre Maichele and Slipknot touring with the same PA, right? I mean, I don't know that you can get more drastically
slightly different
in terms of what that is. We have Post Malone and Hillsong United touring with these products. And so we pride ourselves a great deal in being what we consider, what we say to be reference quality, meaning what we put in is what we get out. That can be a good and a bad thing if what you're putting in is bad, right? And that's obviously quite known. But the products that we create aren't created for a specific genre. They're created for a venue and whatever that venue may do that day. And obviously in a church where I do most of my work, we're doing a lot of spoken word and we're doing music, right? So we're having to design a system that serves both of those equally as well. But we're also looking at a wide genre of music. I mean, from one weekend to the other. I mean, the church that I run front of house at, it's not uncommon for us to have a hymn to probably span 4 decades or 5 decades in one worship set in terms of what we're doing. And if you look at the evolution of worship over 5 decades, it's pretty drastic, right? In terms of what we're doing.
Absolutely.
And the system handles all of that. It coincidentally is a Cara and SB18 and KS28 system. But it spans that gap very, very well. And that is something that I believe really differs L Acoustics from other brands from time to time, is that we're very agnostic in terms of the content, because we just create a great loudspeaker. And what you put in, you're going to get out.
Yeah, I would. I'd almost simplify that by saying, looking over my career, there's a lot of speakers. If you put behind a black cloth, right, played a certain favorite track or whatever else, I could probably guess what that speaker is, because a lot of manufacturers have that sound, right? They have this certain sound that exists across their line that you can you're used to hearing it enough that they sound a certain way. And I won't mention any names because we're not trying to make that good or bad. It's just a fact. But when I finish an L Acoustics system, if I put that one behind the black cloth, it's like, it just sounds good. It doesn't sound like, I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense, colored. But L Acoustics does not have that sound. You know what I mean? They don't have that certain thing that stands out as that's their speaker. They just sound right. They sound good. I don't know how else. I don't know if that's too simple.
I mean, I think that translates out. I mean, that again, what you put in is what you get out. And that's the end goal for us.
It's transparency out of the speaker.
Right.
That's a great way of saying it.
Representing the artist.
Yeah, and that's what every engineer wants. Honestly, if you're a front of house engineer and you do this as a career, or you're really serious about your craft, that's what you want. You want what's coming through or coming from the stage to translate as cleanly as possible, right? So that way, what you do on your console is represented exactly to a T with your speaker system, right?
I think you should say that a different way. Every front of house engineer should want that.
Valid.
Because obviously there's some that don't.
Yeah, some that don't. Right.
They want something completely
They
different.
should. Right. Yeah. Well, Josh. I mean, so what else would you tell us about the speaker technology come from L Acoustics? Probably from, I guess, after the early 2000s into today.
So I think you have to look at we kind of classify our loudspeakers and everything into a handful of different baskets, but I'm going to lump them into 2 baskets right now to talk about both coaxial technology and then anything with our WST waveguide. And the coaxial technology is not something new, right? But Christian was the first loudspeaker manufacturer to use it in a high output scenario. Prior to the mid 80s, when he was doing that, it was very common to see a coaxial speaker in your home studio, home speakers, all of that kind of stuff. And the driving force behind why you would see that is typically you're in very close proximity to those speakers. And so with a coaxial speaker, you have no minimum listening distance because the acoustical center of the low frequency and the high frequency come from the same place. If you look at a large trap box, and we'll use a very, very large trap box for this example, right? But as you get closer, there's going to be a point at which you're going to hear high frequency and low frequency, or high, mid, and low components all separately. And so when you talk about a point source, you're typically in a pretty close proximity to those. Think, lip fills, under balconies, those kinds of scenarios. Having no minimum listening distance is a great advantage. The other huge advantage of that is that the stability, the polar stability, or what we're hearing in the defined coverage area is mostly the same, because you don't have that comb filter that you're going to have by a time arrival difference in a trap box. And because our geometry with a trap box, as we move, is going to constantly change between where the HF and the LF are. And when that happens, that's going to cause a comb filter. Where that comb filter is really depends on where we are in relation to the speaker. You don't have that with a coaxial speaker. So there's a huge advantage to that technology. And that technology spans all the way from the inception of L-Acoustics to even today. Just last year, we released X4i, which is our 4-inch coaxial speaker. It's actually a 4-inch low frequency driver with a 3/4 inch compression driver in it. And so you see us still working on that technology and making it better to this day. When we talk about the DOSC waveguide, or the WST products for us, that is medium throw and long throw line sources. And what that waveguide is doing is creating a truly coherent, time coherent wavefront. And that's the huge difference between L-Acoustics and other manufacturers' technology is in the high frequency. How you hear that high frequency and its efficiency, when we start talking about long throw line sources where you can, let's say, run 0 or 1 degree angles between every box, really depends on how coherent the wavefront is coming out of the box. If it's not coherent, you're not going to get the same amount of ability to project sound. And that's why K1 still is the most power per meter of any speaker on the market, and it's still the product used on the largest and most prestigious events in the entire world. And so that pedigree that comes from that and that technology, you see through the entire line. And I believe that is when we start to talk about vocal intelligibility, throw capability, all of those kind of things, that all still centralizes around that DOSC waveguide and what that does for us. And, we can get really deep into the physics of why that is that way and how it works and why that's superior and how that differs from other manufacturers. But, on a very, very simple statement, that is the thing that defines our line source products from other people's.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. And Michael, you guys, what kind of rig do you guys have at your church?
We got a Kudo rig, 9 boxes aside with flown SB 28s in a N-Fire V-type array. Yeah, it's doing what it needs to do.
Yeah.
Lots of subs.
Lots of subs. Always got to have lots of subs. Josh, what's actually, so this is an ongoing thing in the office where, Michael and I tend to lean more towards we need a lot of subs, right? We need a certain amount of low end. And then, but then there's arguments on the other side. We're that might be too much low end. Where do you sit on that spectrum, of how many subs you need, for a venue?
It's funny you ask that question because there's an internal joke around L-Acoustics, that I sell more subwoofers, and mind you, I'm vertically based. I'm not a salesman, but I specify more subwoofers than any engineer in L-Acoustics. And that Josh is the guy.
That's why I like you, Josh.
Is that where you got it from, Michael, or is it the other way around? I don't know.
But yeah, I have a real affliction for low frequency. If you've heard my mixes, I have a pretty big bottom end to my mix, but it goes further than that. And so if you start to talk about, from a design perspective, why we design the amount of subwoofers that we do in a system, it's a multifaceted approach. The first being, I'm not a big fan of designing systems where any part of the system is a limiting factor over the other. So when I take a look at a system design as a whole, I start to look at what is this product covering and can it keep up with whatever I've chosen the main system to be. So if for my lip fill scenario, I need certain coverage or certain SPL requirements out of that, and that's different than maybe my outfills when I'm looking at those. But ultimately, I don't want to under-design something in a system because a lot of times those under-designed systems are not in earshot of the front of house engineer. And so that's a problem. Now, obviously with subwoofers, that is a consideration, right? Because they are the main system. But if you don't pair the mains and the subwoofers well, then the system at some point becomes nonlinear. And we've done all of this work going up to you buying a sound system to make sure that what is inherently a non-linear thing, a loudspeaker, is as linear as possible, right? That as we go up and down in volume, that it sounds the same. But if it's at some point you're going to run out of gas with your subs, that causes a problem. And so the quantity of subs then really depends on what the contour that the customer or the end user is looking for. And modern day contours are quite large. I mean, even in the most conservative churches, we're still talking about, let's say, 9 dB contours. And we can step up to some other very, very large notable churches, and I won't name drop here, but where we're talking 22 dB contours, right? And so how many subwoofers we design is going to make a difference there. The other thing that you have to consider is that when you under-design a subwoofer system and then you go to time align it, if you are trying to push it or it's under-designed, you're going to find an acoustical crossover that is higher than what you probably want or you intended. When you start to go and look at timing and you look at phase and total summation, because just looking at timing or just looking at impulse or even the both of them is relevant when we start talking about alignment of mains to subs. But when you have a lot of overlap in bandwidth, and that's something that L Acoustics does a lot, we really like that overlap in bandwidth between, let's say, a main and a sub. But when you do that, you have to time it very specifically. You can't just go, yeah, that's about good enough, right? You have to take into consideration phase and impulse and total summation gain. And when you under-design a subwoofer system, you'll find that the total summation will be higher than you intend normally, which means the system isn't as well rounded out. And so from L Acoustic standpoint, we have recommendations. You know, a good example would be A15. With A15, we recommend a 1-to-1 ratio with KS21. When you start to talk about something like Cara, we recommend a 3-to-2 ratio of Cara to SB18s, right? And so that really plays into how we design subwoofers and why. But it really gets more into my entire methodology of how I design sound systems, of making sure that I have the appropriate amount of headroom with every single one of the pieces in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Headroom is key for great mixes and clarity and making sure that you get exactly what you want out of the system.
I should say that I know I pick on Michael a little bit about his subs, but he's definitely winning me over. I'm heading faster his way than he's going mine. So.
Yeah, I ain't going your way.
Yeah.
Not with subs. Hey, Josh, can you talk about floor versus flown subs?
Yeah, I can.
What your methodology with that is?
I can. And if to have that conversation, I'm going to back up a bit, but if you've been involved with L Acoustics for any amount of time, you've probably seen me wear this t-shirt if you've seen me at some point. But it says on the back, the best sound comes from a single source. And while that was quippy, that L Acoustics was a single source, I really believe that it gets deeper into design methodology as well, in that we very much like to try to design with the idea that we want to have a full range PA in the air. A lot of the reason that we want to do that is because that helps normalize everybody in the audience's geometry to the subs and the mains, but more so, or I guess equally so, we also have overlap in bandwidth between the mains and the subs. And so if we want consistent behavior in the polars, and when I say in the polars, I'm talking below the array, to the side of the array, to the back of the array, we have to maintain certain, physics really determines that we have to maintain certain distances of things that overlap in bandwidth. You don't have to worry about this if you high pass your PA to 100 hertz and you low pass your subs to 80 hertz and you separate them. At the end of the day, if you can get the phase fairly close, that's all going to work just fine. But you're going to sense two different loudspeakers, right? You're going to sense a loudspeaker on the ground. You're going to sense a loudspeaker in the air. And to us, we're not saying that's wrong. We're saying it can be better.
I'm saying it's wrong. I hate it. There's nothing worse when you get that.
And there really
it creates that separation. It's just
right. You want that feeling of being surrounded by the music, and you want it to be, if you hear, for instance, a kick drum in real life, you don't hear it coming from two different places, right? And that gets, boy, we can go into the weeds and talking through Elisa, and that's not really the point.
Right.
But I will mention that was, that's Christian's next contribution to the industry was Elisa, and that. But if we really get down to it, in nature, you don't hear a kick drum come from two different places. So we don't want that to happen in in the loudspeaker system. And so we look at trying to provide, 40 hertz and up from the air, if at all possible, and then supplement ground subs. And so for me, my design philosophy oftentimes is I like to fly and ground support subs because I'll run my ground subs more in I'm using a very broad topic here, but to say in an infra mode, right? For us, it's a 60 hertz low pass mode, because the wavelengths are long enough that the proximity to the loudspeaker doesn't feel as drastic. And they're long enough that their proximity to the mains in the air isn't quite so drastic, and you have a bit more grace there. So when we look at that, we go, okay, we're providing some of the infra from the ground. We're getting a lot of our impact and all of that from the air. But at the end of the day, there are certain venues where just that flown system is completely acceptable, right? But for the best of both worlds, we really like that mixture of flown subs or flown low frequency, right? You can look at a main system like K2 that goes down to 35 or 40 hertz with K1SB or by itself, right? Or A15 that goes down to 40 hertz and then supplement from the ground as well. And so that's kind of the approach that we take and I take. Obviously, there are exceptions to this rule, and there always will be. There are times where subs on the ground are absolutely not acceptable in a venue. And so we're doing all of our support from there. And that's not necessarily a problem. In a very small venue, you're going to sense the half space loading from a ground sub from the main. And a lot of people go, well, my subs are punchier when they're on the ground. By the contrary, they're just 6 dB louder for a certain amount of time, right? And that's the half space loading. Anything that is louder is going to have more precedence.
Right.
And 6 dB is double the volume
right.
for that amount of time. And why that's happening is because when we take a loudspeaker and we put it on the ground, we now have a mirror image of it. The direct reflection from the ground essentially has been like we put 2 subwoofers there, right? And that boundary effect that's happening from that is perceivable for a certain amount of distance. But if you look in a very, very large venue, like an arena, there's a point at which that no longer affects people, right? So it does for maybe the first third of the audience, but for the rest, you're no longer gaining that benefit from that half space loading. And in fact, the same thing happens when we fly some subwoofers. And we have a YouTube channel, and I think Etienne Cortel, who's our Director of Scientific Outreach, has or is doing a webinar about subwoofer deployment and what that looks like. But I know he wrote a white paper that was he may have done in New York this past year. But something to take a look at, because that gets really, really deep into the weeds of that same thing happening. Even when a PA is, let's say, 5 meters in the air, that means that essentially the reflection is 5 meters below that, and that all converges at some point. When you put the speaker directly on the ground, it just converges right there, right? And so size of venue has a big effect on this. In a lot of the churches we're working in, you're always feeling that 6 dB boundary for the most part, because they're not super deep venues, right? We might be talking about something that is 10 to 20 meters deep, something to that effect. So,
yeah.
Hey, Josh, the trend for a while was, aux-fed subs. Do you still see that? Do engineers still request that? I believe L Acoustics doesn't really recommend that.
Yeah, so it is a conversation that I'm having less and less these days. When I first started doing things the way I do, which is a fully crossed over PA with no aux-fed sub, I caught a lot of resistance from front of house engineers. But I liken this a lot to that transition from digital consoles, or from analog consoles to digital consoles. There were people who adopted it very quickly. There were people who it took some time, and still to this day, there are those few people who just refuse to still still run on a digital console, which still kind of blows my mind. But the same holds true with the aux-fed sub scenario. And the easiest way that I can explain this when I'm talking about this to groups is to talk about what happens when we do an aux-fed sub. Because if you're using the aux-fed sub to say it's going to the subs or not, and you're just either going from unity or not, that would be the acceptable way to handle this, right? But you have to remember that we have a PA that's going down to 40 hertz or deeper in the air. So what is going to the subs or not really going to do to you, right? If you're looking at the ground sub, because you have to use high pass. So that argument for subs on aux goes away. The bigger problem is that what we find is people go, oh, well, I want a little more low end in the kick drum, but I want less in the bass, and I want more on my tracks, and I want less on the synth. And, this is a really good and easy way to do an example here, right? But we have a crossover point. We've picked this crossover point because that's where they align well. If I shift the magnitude, what happens to the crossover point? The crossover point changes too. And so if someone has decided, if you guys have decided, okay, this is the timing that aligns for best summation from our ground subs to our flown subs or flown main system, and then you change the gain relationship of what's happening on the ground, you're going to shift the acoustical crossover point, which also means that you're going to probably sacrifice energy at that point, because your time alignment was based on something different. And so when I have an engineer say, oh man, I just can't seem to get the low end of my mix right? And then I look at the console and his auxes are all over the board. It's like, well, gee, I can't fathom why your kick and your bass don't feel like they're in the pocket together.
Right.
You're pushing 10 dB on your kick drum and you're pulling 20 dB on your bass.
Right.
So this really aligns too with the fact that you're creating a PA that's unity all the way down to, your lower frequencies too, because I think part of the argument for that, subs on aux could be also if you didn't have enough sub, you have to be able to, you want to push your mains and your subs won't keep up. You have to create, opportunities for different levels or the other way around. But if you have a PA that's fully loaded all the way down to where you need to be, kind of the same thing. They certainly work together.
You're right. I mean, it definitely plays into that whole methodology of designing everything right from the beginning, making sure that everything works well together. And then you don't have the need for some of these tips and tricks and things that we used to do, to make up for that. And I think as an industry, we've made leaps and bounds in terms of our abilities to maintain linearity of loudspeakers and subwoofers and our efficiencies of subwoofers and especially amplification, right? I mean, to look at something like an LA12X from L Acoustics and the fact that we can deliver 3,300 watts a channel on a 4-channel amplifier on a 30 amp circuit, and we can sustain those levels for in excess of 50 milliseconds is pretty insane. And that that also has made a big difference because we can finally design with we design with a lot of subwoofers, but we have very, 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 very high output subwoofers now too.
Yeah, that's good. So anything else? Well, why don't we?
We should get off this sub thing a little bit, because the spoken word is really what we all need. We gotta hear when people talk.
Right.
We are in churches here. They can't forget the message. About music.
Yeah. Well, can you tell us a little bit about L Acoustics? Like, where are we finding L Acoustics rigs today? You said that they were really known back in the day or you guys were known for being on tours, right? But how has that evolved over the last 20 years?
So, it's interesting that you asked that because when you go back 20 years ago, obviously, as you mentioned, we were a touring company. And so if there were installs, those installs existed in what were probably touring houses that wanted a permanent PA. And L Acoustics really drastically started changing their methodology and going after the installation market probably 10 years, I would say around 10 years ago, where things started to more notably change, where there were install series of boxes. We were marketing more that way. And if you fast forward to today, probably 50% of our business now is installation and 50% touring here in the United States. And that's a really interesting metric. Because if you start to look at where are these speaker systems going in, they're going in, us in West Michigan. I mean, it's funny that we're all on this Zoom meeting and yet we could almost throw a stone to hit each other from our 4 homes on a level. But if you look around in a huge part because of Parkway, we have a huge saturation of L Acoustics from everything from restaurants to small churches, right? I mean, we're talking Todd and Michael, you guys have done installations of L Acoustic systems in 100, 150 seat churches, all the way up to a 4,500 seat church that you guys did here in West Michigan. And so really high concentration of L Acoustics here in West Michigan, and a lot because of you guys, partially because I live here, those kinds of things, right? But if you look nationwide, You see L Acoustics now in everything from that small 150, 100-person church all the way up to the Hollywood Bowl, right? To Wells Fargo Arena, to Dickies Arena, a couple arenas that I think we just landed that I can't talk about yet. But the largest and most influential churches in the world are utilizing L Acoustics. But also just the regular church that we mostly all go to as well, right? Mobile churches have been a huge market for us now, in terms of, especially with A-Series, to see a single KS21 with an A10 on top of it on a pole, right? And a single LF4X driving that, so they can roll in, plug in, and go. And so when you start to look at L Acoustics market now, are we still the touring standard? We are. I mean, that's why Stagecoach and Coachella and Tomorrowland and all of these different festivals use us, because while we may not be every engineer's absolute favorite choice for one reason or another, maybe they like the coloring of another PA in one shape or the other, we are accepted by everybody because we can do everything. And so that's why when you look at venues that we're installed in, it's wide, right? It's breweries, it's churches, it's restaurants, it's large industrial applications now. We're seeing it in museums, things like that. And so, really, really wide berth of where you can see L Acoustics products.
So the cool thing to me, and that's for someone like myself and Michael and Christian, we get into a lot of different venues. One of the beauties that, and you should talk a little bit about this, Josh, but one of the beauties of L Acoustics is that they have this common voice. So to be a company that can do business in all them different venues, you have to have products. This is not the day and age like it used to be, where a great sounding speaker, you just tried to pigeonhole it into everything you possibly could, right? I mean, that's what used to happen. The tools weren't there. You had this speaker is just great. Well, somehow we'll make it work here. It may not be the best, it may not be the right thing, but hey, it's better than whatever else we have. Where L Acoustics, starting from a little tiny 4-inch coaxial, all the way up to their biggest stuff, you get a common sound, you get a common quality, and you can use these tools. There's so many tools, and you continue to make more, and that's a big deal. And these they all sound, they all voice, as they can be intermixed in, depending on what product you use, they all have the same sound quality to them for the most part, across the whole line, so you can mix and match things as needed. So that's been one of the things that it's the reason why L Acoustics really is one of the first places we go, when presented with a product. Michael, I know you could probably add some things to that too, but.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can take any of the products really, and if you need front fills, if you need balcony delays, if you need under balcony delays, there's so many choices and so many applications for all the products that it just plays really nice together. It's that consistency. I mean, you go back to that same voicing, and you're able to dial in the PA to sound cohesive.
Yeah, and as a manufacturer, there's always this challenge of looking at what products do we build and for what application, right? And L Acoustics, still to this day, I think we only have something like 34 SKUs of loudspeakers, which is drastically lower than any of our competitors. But you look at the fact that we have, I think, over 600 employees worldwide now. Over 25% of those work in R&D and applications in some way, shape, or form. And we have 34 SKUs. So we've put a lot of time and a lot of effort into every one of our SKUs. We don't just make a product because there seems to be a hole in the market. We make a product because it can serve more than one purpose. And even when you look at a product like Siva, which you guys have heard me say, hey, this isn't a Swiss Army knife, it's a very sharp chef's knife, right? It still has a pretty defined purpose, and we're actually finding the purposes, the market for it widening a bit. But we have put so much time and so much effort into making sure that we create a product that does many things equally as well. And that if you look at our line from that 4-inch coaxial all the way up to K1, that each one of them sounds similar. Now they may have differences in bandwidth and they have differences in suggested subwoofers. But that voice and that clarity and that transparency exists from our smallest to our largest product. And so if they can do what they need to do for that area and they can achieve the SPL for the defined coverage area, they're going to sound the same as their bigger brothers or sisters or smaller bigger brothers and sisters. So.
Yeah, I don't want to make it sound like you got everything. I mean, there's projects that I've looked at that were not good fits, but there's not many.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
there is not many. I mean, there seems to be a.
We know that there's always an application that maybe somebody else has a product that fits better in that very specific application. But a lot of times those are edge cases. And so we're trying to put all of our resources into products that can serve the greater good on a very wide swath instead of this very small edge case. And we think that we've done really well at that. And we know that there are going to be applications where somebody might have something that fits better than we do for that. And that's okay. But we, as a whole, want to make sure that we provide consistency in our product, as you guys have mentioned.
Now, you guys have created, just great sounding products. But let's jump into, we talked a little bit about the history, but let's talk present, right? Let's talk 2020. For those who may not be familiar with all of L Acoustics, what is new for 2020 and what can you tell us about this year and moving forward?
So the newest products for 2020 in late last year, we released our A series, so A15 and A10, and those products were intended to take over the ARCS Wide and Focus ARCS 2 market with products that utilized current new technology that we've been learning, as well as released both a touring and an install version. And that really speaks again to our investment in the install market. And so A series comes in both A15 and A10 with the complementary subwoofer for them, which is KS21. But we have an install version of all three of those as well. And with the install version, we've gone really deep into making sure that we have bits and bobs to rig these products in any possible way you could want, whether that be permanently fixed flush to a ceiling with a very cheap L bracket style rigging, to hanging A10 under KS21 or A15 under KS21, to mounting on a proscenium wall, a single or two speakers. We have an answer for that. And so very, very exciting because that combined, especially A10 combined with, let's say, LA2XI, which is our newest offering in terms of an amplifier, which is a single rack space 4-channel amplifier that can drive everything in our repertoire of loudspeakers except for K1 and K2. And K1 is quite unique in that. And it's an install version amplifier, so it has terminal strip on it. There's no front panel, so people can't mess with it once it's installed. But if you look at A10 with LA2XI, the price point and the SPL per dollar, we're price pointing down with competitors who have plastic boxes in that scenario, with an L Acoustics wooden box with that signature that you guys were talking about for the same cost. And if you really dig into it, our SPL per dollar is extremely competitive in the market. And so, I encourage people who are listening to this or other engineers who are thinking about, hey, how do I look at this? That sometimes you have to take your preconceived notions about driver size out of the conversation and talk about with line sources, what is the SPL, max SPL per meter, right? Not just in a single box, because it's very hard to compare a power density of a 10-inch box versus a 6.5-inch box, for example. So you have to really look at that as SPL per meter, but then you also have to look at, different manufacturers use different tricks in terms of what they use for crest factor and what they publish and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of times SPL numbers are published for marketing reasons. Right? Yeah. And
don't get me, it's all important if it was actually measured equally.
Right. Right. So I've spent a lot of time and I've committed a lot of my career recently to understanding the correlation and the comparison between our products and other products. And L Acoustics is no longer that boutique product that is the most expensive guy in the room. That's just not who we are. We are a product that can compete with everything from mid-level to the top tier products. I believe we have the most transparent sound on the market, and I believe we provide the best cost ratio versus SPL of any product on the market.
I actually listened to the A15, I don't know, a couple of months ago. Michael, I think you took me to this church in Plainfield where they had it sounded stellar.
Sounds amazing.
Stellar. I mean, immediately they played the song.
In a tough room.
Yeah, low ceilings.
I've been in that room. And
it's an old shopping mall.
Yup. I mean, so there's low ceilings.
Explains it.
Yep. And the A series, and mind you, if you say A series around your cell phone, your cell phone's going to think you're saying, "Hey Siri." This happens to me about 10 times a day when my phone lights up from me saying it. But the addition of PanFlex with A series has taken this to a whole new level, because now being able to use the PanFlex to do 70 degrees or 90 asymmetric or 110 means that not only do we get to pick our vertical dispersion now and really craft that for the room, but now we can craft the horizontal dispersion so that we can eliminate some of the reflections on walls, and we can take one PA and craft even a complex geometry of a room. And that's been a big game changer. You now see that with us. Just this year in January at NAMM, we released Cara 2, which is the same Cara we've all loved, but now with PanFlex and better and even better polar response than we've gotten before. So those are, some of the new products that we have coming out, as well as one of the things that we had to do as an ecosystem company was understand that digital audio networking is here. This isn't the future. It is what we use now. We chose the AVB platform, and there's a lot of reasons that we did that. That would be another hour-long conversation to explain to you why. But just know, we released the LS10 network switch to have a very easy plug-and-play AVB connection, because we understand that if we're going to control everything from the console back, we have to be able to also manipulate and control the digital audio streams that are happening. And so that was a new product for us. And we have many more new products. In fact, I think in the past 24 months, we've released more products in 24 months than we have in the history of the company in that kind of term. And we have other new exciting products that hopefully we'll be releasing at the end of this year and the beginning of next year, that are also going to really complement our lineup very, very well. But also keep in mind, keeping that flexibility of things like PanFlex, keeping that the heritage of what we've come from real.
That's cool. That's great. Any other questions you guys want to ask Josh while we have him, guys?
I wanted to just hit on cost again. I think you mentioned something about that a little bit ago, and it's a big deal for me. Our philosophy at Parkway is you do what's right for the customer. End of story. Okay. We don't go in there and try to sell you something you don't need, and we don't oversell you or undersell you. We want to come up with a solution that's going to work for you. And one of the things that we believe we bring to the table is a knowledge of what's happening in that industry, and our job to bring you what the right product is. And it just, I understand we all have competitors, and Josh, you do in the market, we do, with contractors and different things, but to make a decision, and I understand it's tough working with churches, and this is a whole nother, we could go on an hour-long seminar on this too, but you can take a proposal and hold it up to your ear, and it don't sound like anything. Okay?
Right.
And many times have we priced our product out. It's rare that you can have the quality of the loudspeaker, a quality of a system that L Acoustics puts out. And is it a little more than somebody else's? Yes. But by comparison,
the bang for the buck,
there's no comparison. You can always find something cheaper. Okay. But you're not going to find something as good for the dollar value that you're purchasing. And it drives me nuts when I see churches making decisions for a few bucks, and they have no idea what they're even deciding on, and that's been the beauty to me. I know I can put any product from L Acoustics into a design, and I know what it's going to sound like, and a lot of that is experience of using them in different venues and in different places. But, L Acoustics is a great loudspeaker at a very affordable price. And we have access, and anyone can say that, but the fact of the matter is we can sell anything we want in the industry. We're a large enough contractor that any vendor wants to beat our door down and wants us to sell their product. We have our choice. Not everybody has that ability. We do. And we choose, to lead with L Acoustics based on experience as to what we can do. So we lose projects, but we don't lose them because we're not giving them the best product that they could possibly buy. We lose them because somebody decided to cut corners because of cost. Maybe.
Yeah, and that's an important topic to talk on because I've heard this out of, and I won't totally pick on just pastors here, but I've heard this out of restaurant owners' mouths and all that kind of stuff that, listen, I don't need that quality. So I'm going to go buy this plastic speaker and I'm going to hang it with deck chain from my ceiling.
From Guitar Center.
And that's an option, sure. But to also talk about the longevity of the product. And, we talked about the ecosystem when we started this whole thing. Hopefully, Todd, you're walking into that church or that venue in 15 years and you're replacing the initial L Acoustic system that's been there and is still operating in good working form because we've done all the research and the time and the R&D to make sure that we can maximize output while also maximizing duty cycle. And I think, it's a testament to that is looking at guys who bought VDOS early on. When they went to buy K1 and K2, they were selling their VDOS 15 to 18 years later for more money than they bought it for. Now, obviously, that's a bit of an anomaly in the industry as a whole or in technology, period. But you can take that and go laterally and look at a venue and go, listen, when we're making a PA purchase, this is a 15-year plus purchase. This is going to serve our venue well, especially if we're forward thinking about designing the system to handle anything, not just what we're doing today. Consoles are going to come in and out, right? And so I encourage people, and there's a reason I do this. I work for a loudspeaker manufacturer, right? But I do encourage people to look at it and go, if we're going to put our investment somewhere, let's put it in the loudspeaker system because it's very, very hard to replace down the road. It's cost prohibitive to just swap your PA out all the time.
Right.
Swapping your console out might take you a day or less, right? Swapping your PA out you have to have an integrator. You have to have all of those kinds of things.
And that's important to say in this day and age when we live in this throwaway society. And that does apply to electronics. I mean, this stuff comes and goes and, it can be easy to be done, but loudspeakers is a completely different
I think
animal there.
What's funny is you mentioned coming back 15 years later. I've been coming behind Todd on a lot of his old installs.
It happens
Todd,
regularly.
I'm replacing your PA.
He'll show me a picture. Like, I've been there. Yeah, I probably hung those boxes
all the time.
Hey, Josh, you got any horror stories from front of the house?
Oh, horror stories from front of house.
Yeah, give us one horror story from your experience. This is a new question that we're asking. Would love to hear it.
Yeah,
French horn player.
Being a through and through L Acoustics guy and having been that even prior to me working for L Acoustics properly or dealing the product, I bought into the idea pretty early on after I was exposed to L Acoustics, understanding why and everything, and it became very comfortable mixing on the products. But then jumping in and going and doing some outside consulting stuff with other churches or things like that, where I'm helping them pull things together. I can go all day long, and I fancy myself to be a pretty good systems engineer and system calibrator. And so I feel like I can get
That's an understatement, by the way.
Yeah.
I can get a pretty good result out of any PA. And so a lot of times people say, well, hey, we're not ready to upgrade our PA, but can you come in and tune it for us so that, like you do for your L Acoustic stuff. Or, when I was touring and doing that kind of stuff, I would come in and do that. And while what I see on my screen looks very similar to what I see with my L Acoustic system, when I push the faders up, I get a very drastically different experience out of that. and I won't bust over this, but I did a project with the church and they had heard me mix in one of those large festival scenario, or large, I guess it wasn't a festival, it was a large Christian event in an arena. And they really liked that, and they wanted me to come create that for them in their room. And no matter the amount of EQ I did, no matter how much I obsessed over making the contour and the frequency response look like what I got out of the L-Acoustic system, when I pushed the fader up, the vocals just weren't there. I was running into distortion, and it really made me remember that one of the things that we used to do as sound engineers and front of house engineers is, number one, we can bury sins in distortion.
Or reverb.
And two, with subwoofer systems, we a lot of times the cue to pull back or to stop was distortion, right? And so I have to remember that when I leave, and the horror story is weird, right? Because I spent the entire time chasing my tail, trying to get things right, because it just didn't track. It wasn't linear. It wasn't like I'm used to. But I found myself mixing on the meter quieter than I normally do, but it felt louder. And the next week I went back to my church and I'm mixing on an L-Acoustics Cara PA again. And all of a sudden everybody's like, is it a lot louder this week? And I look over at the meter, and it was because I don't have those cues of distortion and things like that to hide behind, right? So it challenges me to be a better engineer. But also it just is louder in general because I wasn't having to hack up I wasn't having to pull back a little bit because of that distortion and those kinds of things. So kind of a weird disaster in that aspect, but it's
all perspective, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, Josh, where can people find L-Acoustics? Where can they find you? I want to give you the opportunity to just be able to let people know, where can they find you? Where can they find L-Acoustics? Where are we pointing them to?
Sure. So first and foremost, obviously, www.l-acoustics.com is the website to be able to go check out all of our products, current news, new products that are coming out. That's where you can download SoundVision, our free 3D modeling software. It's where you can download LA Network Manager, which is our platform for controlling our amplified controllers. So obviously a great resource there. But if you go on there, you can also take a look at the certified provider section in the installation area. And there you'll find Parkway. Parkway has been a long-term certified provider for L-Acoustics and a great partner for many, many years for us. And one of our most active church installation and installation in general contractors nationwide here. But if you're not in the area or you want to use somebody locally to you and you're in Southern California, go on the website. There you can see all the other certified providers. And that stamp, that certified provider stamp is very important to L-Acoustics because it's a partnership between us and the integrator. We know that the work they do is good. We know that they've been trained. And it's very much a two-way relationship. With all three of the gentlemen that we're talking with today, we have weekly banter on projects that they're working on. And it doesn't just take the view of L-Acoustics into account or the view of Parkway, but it's a partnership that allows Parkway to know the customer and know all the things they know about the project and what is preferential and all that. And me, who eats, sleeps, and breathes L-Acoustics on a daily basis, to say, yeah, I think this product will do well here, or maybe we should look at this. And so obviously, take a look at those. Take a look at the certified providers in your area. If you're not in the area that you think Parkway could service, but I know that you guys have done projects all over the country. And it's something that doesn't faze you in the least bit.
Yeah, and you mentioned something about a YouTube channel. Is that something that you want to point people to as well? Any social media?
So the YouTube channel is great, especially if you're in a situation where you would like to learn more. And I'm going to pull it up real quick because I can't remember it off the top of my head. So hold on here. But that YouTube channel, one of the things that we did during this pandemic time is we've put a lot of time and resources into education. And that's something that L-Acoustics has been known for from the beginning of education. And we really pride ourselves. We put a lot of time and effort into our education, but we've really stepped it up during these pandemic times to have everything from basic SoundVision tutorials to case studies on things like the Rammstein tour to deep dives into white papers that the men who my colleagues who I work with, the men and women colleagues that I work with who are way smarter than me, have put out and done. But this is a great thing. And so it's actually, if you go to YouTube and you search Ill Acoustics, we have a channel, and it's youtube.com, LA the Best Sound.
LA the Best Sound.
LA the Best Sound. And so a lot of resources, especially over the past month, of videos that are anywhere between 30 minutes and an hour and a half, probably. You can see me in one of the first ones. I did a House of Worship case study on there with Scott Sugden and BJ Shaver. So I think that's a great one. But all of our different products there, and these are happening live weekly. So I think we have, like this week, another 4 happening. And so we're doing 3 to 4 of these live a week. And then we're rebroadcasting them on the YouTube channel as well.
That's great. That's great. Thanks
Awesome.
for sharing that, man. Well, Josh, thanks so much for being a part of the podcast today. Yeah. And we love to have you back on at some other point. I'm sure we will, to share some road stories, because I'm sure you got tons of them. But again, thanks for being a part of it, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Josh.